Hi everyone, Speedy here. Welcome back to Planet Zoo Episode 2. Today's episode, we've got quite a bit. This is what we're going to get done. We're going to finish off this bridge. We're going to plot out a spot for our main street. We're going to add some pathing off and some staff facilities. And of course, we're going to work on our first animal habitat. While we're at it, I'll also be adding some detailing to the main building, as you can see right here. Really bring this area together. But as we jump into that, let's talk some Planet Zoo news because it was a big week. During this week, Frontier released a special 6-year anniversary video celebrating not just the game's longevity, but also its community, featuring a bunch of creators talking about their experiences with Planet Zoo to celebrate this big milestone. And at the end of this video, we got a teaser for Planet Zoo 2 for 2026. That is massive news, and definitely something to keep an eye on. Not a lot of info at this stage beyond this video, but big news for the Planet Zoo community. For now though, let's get back to our current zoo and make some progress with the changes to the bridge here. With what we're working on right now, I would say that this main entrance is pretty much finished. As you can see, we're just adding some fencing, using one of the game's inbuilt fences. I was pretty happy with adding some pillars here to represent these corners. And once we've done that, just a few details on the building itself. We've added the information center already, and just over here adding some walls to kind of close in the area, and then finally some detailing in front of the building, as you are about to see. First of all, just getting rid of these pillars and moving these other pillars to really, I think the bridge is really come together quite nicely, quite happy with it. And now jumping back to the building, and this is what I was talking about here. Some plants, some rocks, just some natural features to really bring it together. And then we put a bit of decor on the wall as well with these elephants. That's just something different, breaks up a bit of empty space, and just finishes off our main building area. Now, we were going to be working on the main street, however, I don't really have a vision for what I want it to look like right now. So at the moment it's just a path, we know where it's going to be, but there is actually nothing there yet. Working on the rest of the paths now that go down around the waterfront. We'll do a bit of work on both edges of that very shortly. And on this side, broke it up a little bit with this sort of circle, crescent court, I guess you would say at the end, and then a staff path coming up because we will need some staff facilities later. Fixed up the path of the main plaza and now jumped into working on this crescent down here, bringing back our rock curb that we made in episode 1. I think it is just really nice to have these natural curbs here, and it's a big reason why I don't really use the game curbs at all. A big tree centerpiece to kind of, as the feature point of this area, brings it to life, and then some foliage around it. Throwing in a few different rocks. Next up, we wanted a bit of a fencing along the waterfront, and I decided to make my own here. So we went with a brick style base, and then just use some different wooden pieces to add some detailing, some railing to this, and I'm actually really happy with how this turned out as well. We used this quite a bit in this episode. I feel like just adding a bit of variety to paths and fencings can really make each area feel unique, and that was the goal here. So lying this path along this wall, along the path along the waterfront. We'll do a bit of detailing to the waterfront eventually, but for now this sort of provides a nice barrier between the two areas. Those being the areas where we want the visitors to be and where we don't want the visitors to be. Here now had to throw in some staff buildings because we can't get any animals if we don't have any staff buildings. What I realized later is that there is an option to turn off the visitor interactions with staff buildings, because one of the features of this game, the last time I played it, was that visitors don't want to see staff buildings. You need to tuck them away because they cause negative mood. That is in sandbox mode now an option to turn off. So I haven't actually done any decoration with the staff buildings because I might try and incorporate them into the park. Finally, we now get into our exciting part, our first habitat, and it is going to be the giraffes. The reason for that was because I had a bit of an idea about what I wanted for this, so I thought it would be a good first exhibit to sort of get me into the groove, just connecting up to the path. Throw in the giraffes now, because then I can actually use the giraffe biographies to see what's going on. First thing I did was realize that I wanted to extend the habitat because I didn't think it was big enough. We actually end up extending it again later, and you'll see why very soon. So just making this a little bit bigger. And the first feature in the exhibit is the water holes. So just throwing in the sand, throwing in a bit of dirt, but I really wanted this water feature in here. And so we go ahead and throw some water in there, and then start using some rocks and bushes to make it feel more organic and natural. Enclosure design and decorations aren't areas I'm super confident in. Last time I played this game, which was quite a while ago, a lot of my enclosures did start very similarly with these rectangles, quite flat, quite boring. So one of the aims of this series is to push myself with some more dynamic, some more varied enclosures. So I know this one's not a great one to start with because it is quite flat and rectangular, but giraffes live in very flat, open areas, so I feel like you can forgive me here. With the foliage and the rocks, I tried to focus on grouping them into clusters rather than having it spread out, to give that sense of the savanna that these giraffes come from, where there is a lot of flat, open areas, and rather than having the foliage spread around, going for a bit of a rock feature here as well, with some of the different savanna rocks, throwing a tree and some bushes around that as well. So having done that, now moving on to what I really wanted for this habitat, which was a raised viewing deck. So this idea of this is to create a building where visitors can come up and sort of be at eye level with the giraffes, because of course the thing is, when you're a human standing on the ground looking at giraffes, you got to strain your neck, you got to look up. Of course, I immediately got distracted and decided I wanted more foliage, so along the front I did that. But the idea is that visitors will be able to look across the exhibit, they'll be able to look down into the exhibit, and they'll be able to come face to face with these giraffes. So once I've finished throwing in more plants and rocks, we will get back to that. Even some extra trees here as well. So now onto the building. First of all, fixing the path to make sure it was nice and straight. I originally wanted to use a bit of a foundation, as I'd done with the main building the first time. You can see I've got the mud wall foundation here with these wooden plank walls around it. In the end, I actually got rid of these because, as you soon see, I was first of all playing around with the flooring and decided, no, don't like the wooden slats there. They poke through the building as well. I don't think they look very nice. I don't think they'd be very nice to walk on. Try these, but you can see through them, and then eventually we just go with the same flooring that matches the building. And I think it actually looks quite neat and quite polished. After moving this and playing around a little bit trying to get rid of the curb, can't get rid of the curb on a raised path, it turns out that the foundation that I put in is now completely submerged. So instead, I just got rid of it. Don't want to be using any unnecessary pieces in the game for performance reasons more than anything. Now that we've done that, moving on to the back of the building. So the idea here is that there will be a big open deck for the guests to be standing on. They'll walk up the stairs, they'll be under a pergola type thing, and they'll be able to sit there and watch the giraffes. It was looking very plain and similar at the minute, so I used some of these wooden slats just to break up, add a bit of colour and add something a little bit different to the building now. And now just finishing along with the path so that the path and the stairs all flow very naturally in with the building. It all feels a part of it. Now onto the roof. Played around with a few ideas. I thought of maybe some glass, tried the terracotta, and eventually settled on the thatched roof. So we've gone for the 1 meter slant here on our patio type area. Wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do with the roof for the actual building itself. First of all, we went with the flat roof, so just popping that on there. Needed to raise up the rest of the building now so that it could meet that requirement. Quickly popped that up there, got rid of those, and now for the supports for the roofing. So what I did here was I went with these pillars. They were about the perfect height. And then I used a little trick. So these aren't grid pieces, so you have to move them manually. But if I add a grid piece, select both of them, then I can treat them like grid pieces, and then I just need to go back and delete those afterwards, and voila, perfectly spaced supports. Going with the fencing now, I thought I'd just go with this game fence. I think it looks quite nice in this area. I could have made a custom one again like I'd done with the wall down the front, but I didn't feel that it was necessary, and I really liked how the building was coming together. So really happy with this balcony area and how it all turned out. There is currently a slightly awkward space between the enclosure and the building itself, but I managed to fix that later by actually extending the habitat wall so that the building forms part of the habitat wall, and that cleans it up quite nicely, I think. Finishing off the fencing now just by adding it to the railing. This was not super elegant. I think it does the job well enough. There's this awkward V shape where the angled fence meets the flat fence, so we just kind of threw in something to cover that up, essentially. And again, not super elegant, but it does the job. Going back to the roof, decided didn't like the flat roof. I wanted this to be a bit more of a spectacle, so we come in with the pitched roof, but this time the 2 meter pitched roof as opposed to the 1 meter pitched roof that we had. Well, this might even be the 4 meter pitched roof. So just a big spectacle, getting these on here, and then finally just adding some benches so this really feels like a place where visitors can come see the giraffes, but also sit for a while if they desire. Now onto the fencing, so incorporating the wall of the building into part of the enclosure. This can be a little bit finicky in terms of animal escapes, but hopefully I've got the fence close enough to the wall that it won't be an issue. I realized I'd actually re-put in a fence, so had to use the invisible barrier there. We stick with the posts for now, I might remove them later. Finally finishing off the building. Focused again on breaking up the materials a bit so it's not so samey, adding some variety in textures. I am aware though that if I do this too much, then all of my buildings are going to have that same feel to it, so I'll probably experiment with some different building styles. A lot of the structures, the 2 buildings I've made are both just big rectangles, so different shapes, different building styles will hopefully break up the look of the zoo, and it is also quite a flat zoo at the moment, so looking at adding some different terrain variation as well in order to make it feel more natural and not just a big cleared space of land. It's not a very dynamic zoo, I guess you would say right now, so that is definitely going to be a focus for future episodes and future habitats. Coming back now to the waterfront, taking the wall that we had made earlier on and extending it on to this side as well to kind of encase that entire waterfront in this fence. I do really like this fence. I have used it quite a bit in this episode for that reason. I'll probably use it some more because I just really like it. Feels simple, but it feels like it fits the area really well. It feels like it can fit a lot of different themes, incorporate some different textures. I know that's a bit of a lot to say about a wall, but I just really like it. So what are you going to do? Back to the exhibit, the enclosure, and I realized that there was no hard shelter, there was no feeding, and there was no enrichment for these animals. So bit of an oversight on my part, so quickly throwing in some raised feeders. And now onto bedding. What are we going to do about bedding? The shelters in the game are very, very large, and so, as I mentioned earlier, we had to extend the habitat again. So taking out the back fence here. Again, looking at some of the pre-built shelters, I looked at a few of them. I wasn't super happy with them. I think they were a bit too big for what I was looking for, and so I decided I was going to make my own. I lowered the terrain a little bit. This is because regardless of whether I used a pre-built one or whether I made my own, it was going to be quite a tall building, and I didn't want it to be overpowering next to the visitor building as well. So playing around with that, decided I didn't like that, decided I was going to build my own, moved out a bit more of the terrain. So just by lowering the terrain, by lowering the height that the building starts at, it just means it's not going to be quite as overbearing. When I worked on it, we go back to the mud walls that I was originally going to use for the viewing platform. I had to do this a couple of times because I used the base pieces on the second layer, and that looked a bit weird. What I also wanted to do here was have the roof feel a bit more open and not completely close in for a bit of, I don't want to say ventilation, but just also a different style as well, rather than having the roof sitting on top. So I decided to use some beams to create like an open roofing, essentially. And the roof design took me a couple of goes to kind of work out what I wanted. First of all, I had the slat here and put on the 4-meter roof. It is the 4-meter roof that I use on the building as well. Move that around. No, didn't like that. I didn't like that there was only one beam. So I added a second beam, added a third beam in the middle, and then I was like, well, you know what? Let's like fully support this and put in some diagonal beams as well. So I was quite happy with that decision. I thought it came out looking quite nice. And again, it's just something a little bit different. Makes the buildings feel a bit more unique and like they have their own style. So the next minute or so is just me playing around with the roof, because now I realized I hadn't selected that. This took me a little bit of time to get right. Not so bad when you're watching it in 400 speed, I guess, or even some bits are a little bit faster. Here just needed something along the top, but we are starting to get towards the end of the video now as we finish up this enclosure. Then I went to put in the sides, realized, oh, I didn't have any slats or any supports, so I'll get rid of those. And then after all that, I decided that the whole point of lowering the building was so that it wasn't overbearing, and having the 4-meter roof felt a bit much. So I took the whole thing out and replaced it with the 2-meter roof, so that the building wasn't as in your face, basically. Then over here, just needed to do some sides. I didn't do the diagonal cross beams because being on the corner, I didn't really think I was going to be able to. And I think it looks fine enough. Fill in the corners, and then, even though we didn't use the flat roof last time, we will use the flat roof this time. So there is the hard shelter done. Now adding some rocks and plants around the shelter so that it feels a bit more blended in and not just a big building slapped in the middle of this enclosure. Try and blend it in with the natural elements, because I wouldn't call myself an excellent decorator and designer in games like this, but just throwing some rocks and bushes can actually go a really long way, and it's my go-to strategy for decoration. Then I throw in some tropical rocks around here and around the waterhole, because I'd only just used the savanna rocks at this point and it was feeling very one-dimensional. Finally, now throwing in some enrichment items and also a third giraffe into the area, and that is it. So that brings us to the end of the episode. We've finished our entrance area, we've started laying out the main street, and our giraffes now have this brand new enclosure. If you've enjoyed the video, please leave a like down below, and if you're keen for more Planet Zoo content, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching, everyone. I've been Speedy, and I'll see you all next time.